I think that community, it has a snowball effect, and it doesn't have to be this big act. Don't wait until an offsite. Don't wait until a workshop, because I tell people offsites and workshops typically, they don't have lasting impact because they're one-offs. And so it takes a series of repeated actions for things to percolate, with us and to have impact. So start small.
Welcome to the Made Leader Podcast, where exceptional leadership isn't about who you are, but who you choose to become. Join your host, Jen Arnold, for expert interviews, real-world stories, and practical advice that transforms managers into exceptional leaders. If you're a middle manager ready to unlock your potential, this is your podcast. Let's get started.
Hey there, and welcome to the Made Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Jen Arnold. As a leader, I'm guessing building community among your team isn't on the top of your list of things to do, but I promise it's important. When you think of it, the team environment you build or you co-create with your team is a community. How you show up with your team and how you all work together can deeply impact how your team experiences the company, for better or worse. And that's why I wanted to bring on today's guest, DeMario Bell. I know DeMario from his former company where he worked as head of community at Culture Amp. DeMario is an award-winning community builder who knows firsthand that when people feel truly seen and heard, extraordinary things happen. DeMario's built global communities that connected over 100,000 HR and people leaders and 200,000 members in ways that actually matter. DeMario is now founder of Gatherful, where he helps create communities that transform organizations through expert strategy, consulting, and speaking. In today's episode, we dive into why building authentic community at work matters more than ever, what makes workplace relationships different from personal ones, and practical ways that you can foster the sense of community on your team. DeMario shares some simple, actionable steps that you can take to start building community on your team tomorrow with no forced happy hours required. I promise. All right, without further ado, let's get to my conversation with DeMario. DeMario, welcome to the Made Leader Podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Jen. Thank you. Thank you.
Of course. Well, let's get started with community. So community can be interpreted a million different ways, but what does community mean to you?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'll tell you this, Jen. I love talking about community because it's what I've spent my life work doing, building communities. I've been very passionate about communities. I'm a first-generation college graduate, and I learned firsthand the power of community. I always tell people that universities here in the United States weren't designed for first-generation college graduates. So we had to find our own community. And it was typically those who were, like me, going through the struggle together, who could amplify and edify each other. There's something powerful to say about experiencing a valley with your people. It builds endurance. So for me, when I think about community and what I've narrowed it down to, simply it's a human experience. When I think about community, I say that community is the group of people who will pick you up when you stumble, and they're the same group of people who will cheer you on when you have your wildest, most ambitious goal.
It is a human experience. Yes, I love that. So a supportive group of people that are going to be with you no matter what. I imagine that ebbs and flows too. So, communities change over time, right? Sometimes you find yourself outgrowing a community, or you finding maybe they're not as supportive as I thought.
Yeah. Yes. And if I can get really personal with you, I went through that experience a couple of years ago where I was going through some really, let me just say life was lifing a couple of years ago. And I was going through some loss. And the community who were my go-to, not all, but some, the community who was my go-to, I guess they weren't there in the way that I would have liked, Jen. And I remember talking about it to a friend, and I was like, who raised them? And so to your point, community does ebb and flow. There are times where you outgrow people, you outgrow groups of people, and it's not an indictment on either. It's just that's just life. We just outgrow spaces, and what I needed in that season of my life might not be what I need going forward. And that's the beauty of community. Like, is that no matter where you are in your life, hopefully you'll be able to have people there at that stage to be able to support you and vice versa. It's reciprocal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely happened too. Is just outgrown communities and finding out that maybe that not that community, maybe there's another one. And it seems like there are them, and there's definitely them at work, right? I mean, if you think about work, it's a giant community, but then of course there's communities within. But I want to talk about what's the difference between community and then people saying work family, work spouse, we're all family, blah, blah, blah. What is the difference there?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because that's something I've been digging into lately and like really distinguishing. So here's my hot take on that. So early in my career, Jen, I embraced this whole idea that we're a family workplace rhetoric. Like wholeheartedly, I was new into my career. When anytime I heard we're family, like I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm like, oh, that has to be true. For me, of course, being early in my career, this is years ago, I was drawn to this idea of having a sense of belonging and also being told that we're like a family, because for me, I was like, well, we're like a family. That means you're going to accept me, unconditionally. But let me tell you this. Experience taught me otherwise. I tell people family relationships are fundamentally differently because from workplace relationships, because family typically offers inherently, unconditional love. And I say typically, family relationships can ebb and flow as well.
Mm-hmm.
However, with workplace relationships, Jen, they are inherently conditional. The behavior dynamics, they differ significantly. And perhaps most importantly, I tell people like, I didn't get a chance to choose my family. Like I love them, but I didn't get a chance to choose them. Whereas we do choose where we work, and organizations can choose to let us go, Jen, when we no longer serve their interest. And so what I've come to appreciate is that organizations that have healthy relationships and a healthy culture, they don't necessarily need to use metaphors like we are family, because you feel it. To me, when hear organizations use, family language, to me, it feels like they're often creating this one-sided emotional obligation that benefits them more than the employees. And as someone who hangs out with HR and people and culture leaders, every day, when I hear someone say or use that terminology, we're family, I get cringe now because I'm like, tell me more about that. Like, what do you mean when you say that we are family? Because I've also seen that language weaponized as well. And I think, and if I can go deep, and I'm going to come off of this, when we say we're family, I look at that is disproportionate because there are groups of people who have certain identities, Jen, who can't, when we talk about we're family, really live into that. There are repercussions as a result of that. And so when we talk about like we're a family, who are we talking about and who aren't we talking about when we say that? Because I'll tell you, Jen, if I like show up in the way that I show up with my family, I'm sure that an organization will probably, reprimand me in a way, that will put me back in my place.
Well, plus, how many of us have super normal families, right? We don't. A lot of us don't have like these. What is it? God, Brady Bunch type atmospheres. I don't even know. Who is the quintessential family representation? Right. But most of us don't have it. We all got something. We're like, yeah. I go to work to get away from the family, right?
Yeah, exactly. Listen, work, I tell someone I find solace in my work, because like you said, like my family is not, made of all roses. And I appreciate that about them. But, family can be too much. So I'm very careful about not using that word family when I refer to my colleagues. I love several of them dearly. Some of them have become like family, outside of work, but to use that word as an umbrella term to refer to my colleagues, I think sometimes I can find that a little disingenuous.
Yeah. So let's just say community does not equal family. We're not talking about getting your little work family there. So how is it different? So when you're talking about building community within a workplace, what does that mean? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so I would say that workplace communities differ from other communities, Jen, in a number of key ways. So in the workplace, we have power dynamics that exist through hierarchy and performance evaluations. And so this creates a different type of relationship foundation. When I think about the communities in which I'm a part of, let me just set this context. The communities in which I'm a part of, we have shared values, we have shared goals. I've opted into that. And it's something that I go to when I need support, when I want to celebrate. And so those are my people that I've selected. So in the workplace, that's a little bit differently because participation isn't fully voluntary. Like we need our jobs, Jen. And so that changed how we authentically engage with one another. I'll also say in the workplace, business objectives drive communities. And so when you think about like ERGs or workplace communities or MRGs or whatever terminology, yes, they are communities for us to come together and get to know each other and to be there. But at the end of the day, businesses are wanting to see what impact are those workplace communities having on the business, be it through retention, sense of belonging, engagement. So those are a little bit differently because you have to show, like measurable impact. But what I will tell you is that what makes workplace communities powerful is that they can be transformative in nature. I believe that when workplace communities are done well, there's a layer of psychological safety that enables both personal growth and business growth. So it's not binary, it's both and. So for me, it's like, how do we turn some of this um, transactional behavior that happens in the workplace to some meaningful connection. So that's how I look at them as differently, where some of the communities I'm a part of are more for like social connection, and workplace are more, they're there for the business.
Yeah, I like what you said about those power dynamics, because yeah, when you are in a workplace, you always have that as a factor. But when there's outside communities, like you said, all communities are different, but the best run ones are like there's not that power structure in there, right? Everyone's part of the community. There is no head, even if there's an, informal head, someone leading the group or whatever.
I used to run an HR community, Jen, and I don't have a traditional HR background. And when I took the role, once I convinced them that I could do the role, then I had to like deliver because I wrote a check and you can complete the rest. And so I said, okay, now I got to deliver on this. But to your point is, for me, I was really nervous. I'm like, okay, I don't have this traditional HR background. Like, what hierarchy or power dynamics could be present? Because for a number of my members, they, probably thought that there was one with me because I was the leader of this group. But one of the things that I was intentional about when building community is creating community with my members and not for them. And I like the preposition with is because it's all about co-creation, which eliminates that power dynamic. Yes, at the end of the day, if something went wrong, I was accountable, but I never made it about me. Let me go down a rabbit hole, Jen, and I'll come back
Go
up.
for it.
Just yesterday, I was talking about David Meister's trust equation. And David Meister says that, we know when trust is present and when it's not present, but we don't often have the building blocks to know what makes up trust. So David Meister put together this equation where he says what makes up trust is credibility, reliability, and intimacy. Like you need that. And so when I think about community, Jen, we need intimacy. It's their psychological safety. Can you be discreet with me? Can you trust me? Are you safe with me? We want to feel that way in a community. All those elements are true. Reliability. Reliability is like how people perceive us. Are we predictable? Can they depend on us? When we go to a community, we go for the utility, but stay for the unity. That goes to credibility. When we go to a community, we obviously have a problem that we're trying to solve. Can I get my problem solved there? However, Jen, this is the power dynamic. He also says the fourth part of that trust equation, self-orientation. So David Meister says that when you're high on self-orientation, which means that you're all about yourself and not about others, you can destroy the other parts of the trust equation: intimacy, reliability, and credibility. And so when I think about community and hierarchies that exist for me, when I was going into running this community, I had to think about that. Like, how do I make this more about my members and less about me, but also bring each other on that journey as well, which is very important, really, really important. And I had to learn over the years, Jen, to not feed into that, to feed into this hierarchy. One thing that a mentor once told me, he said, DeMario, he said, don't get so caught up in titles. He said, although we have different roles within a company, he said, that's just simply it. He said, we just have different roles, but we're all contributing to the same mission. And it was the way that he said that really impacted me, because when I started running a community in which I had no domain expertise, what I did was I elevated the voices who were the experts and allowed myself to be vulnerable to learn in the areas in which I was strong, which was building community, building those building blocks so those things could be possible. It eliminated that power dynamic and made it more about us and them and more about we.
So thinking of managers,
Yeah.
leaders,
Yes.
specifically middle managers, how do they do it? Because they're definitely not community builders. And, you've got communities that pop up at work, whether those are in groups and ERGs, whatever that looks like in your workplace. But every leader has a little community, right? And they are not voluntary. They're part of it, right? It's part of the work contract.
Yeah.
But, why should a leader consider this thought of community building among their team?
Great question. So David Meister says that as well, that a real leader should have the capability to build trust, and community at the heart of it, Jen, is about trust. In the workplace, we spend so much of our time with the people that we work with. And Jen, I want to like the people that I work with because we spend so much time together. I also think it's really important for middle managers to build community because it allows team to weather storms together. As we all know, when we think about the circle of control and concern, like, we can't control how businesses perform and the policies that we set. Like, we can influence that through our work, but we necessarily can't control the outcomes. Like, the sphere or the circle that we can control are like our direct work. And so managers, when you have a strong team and you have community, it fosters, like, we're in this together. Like, even if we don't see the North Star, but we got each other. So there's camaraderie that happens. And I tell people that's not necessarily always fostered through an offsite or a workshop. That's through consistent and small actions. I tell people, a relationship is only frequency of touch, which is why one-on-ones are very important, and setting aside 15 minutes, in a one-on-one, depending on how the duration of the one-on-one, just for some genuine conversation. Like, I can get to know you, Jen. You can get to know me. Jen, I can spot when something is off. I can detect when something is going on at home because we have that community. We know each other. But if I don't know you, Jen, not only is there like this dissonance, but the degree in which you and I can trust each other might not be as deep. And so I think it's really important for middle managers to build community because it really has an impact on not only how the team collaborates with each other, but also on the velocity on how the team will contribute to its deliverables.
Yeah. And what I'm, thinking about what you're saying is, like, it's at the heart of its trust and its relationship, and it's getting to know your people. So I think some managers may misconstrue communities into, like, we're going to force icebreakers on people, and we're going to, make everyone go out for after hours drinks, and we got, kind of force it. But you're saying it is at the basis, it's trust and it's relationship.
Yeah. And to go back to how we opened, Jen, like, community can mean many things to many people. And we don't want to, and what you and I, we're not saying, like, if that's how you define community, great. But community doesn't have to be this big and flashy. So happy hour, drinks and all of that, because Jen, that's not probably how I like to even build community with someone. I don't, and so when we go back to like family dynamics, like I might only like to drink with family or with like close friends, not with colleagues. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but community can be like small actions. It can be literally, Jen, sending a Slack note or a Teams note or whatever, just saying, "Hey, Jen, hope you had a great weekend." That's building community. I tell people community it's an act of doing. It's not necessarily like this. It doesn't have to be this physical place or this physical thing, but you feel it. You see what I'm saying, Jen? So I think what we have to do when we talk about community is understand, like, what are we talking about? Like, when you say community, what are you saying? When I say community, what am I saying, so that we're operating off of the same definitions? And we know, Jen, as two folks who have been building workplace cultures now, that middle managers have a lot on their plate, and with the advent of COVID, it's transformed how HR teams function, but also what we require of middle managers. And so I don't want middle managers to hear like, "Oh, I have one more thing added to my plate," because for the most part, middle managers are already building community and doing it well. I also I want to point out, Jan, there are some people who treat work as work. They're like, "I just want to come to work and do my job." And I hear that perspective, but I'm not sure that's the best perspective to have as a middle manager, especially when you're a people leader leading people. Work just can't be work, because you have people who are depending on you. And again, when you go back to that trust equation, people are looking at a manager to be credible, reliable, and also create that psychological safety, which is a key part to community.
Yeah, and I have heard that I just want to go in, do my job, and leave. And if you have, even if you're not like that as a middle manager, but you have people on your team like that, it's like, okay, we'll make the most of your work, right? Like, you don't need to do anything after hours, but how can we build that relationship? Because you don't want your people to dread team meetings, right? You don't want to go, "Oh God, I don't know what to say," and not know how to build that sense of camaraderie. And even if that feels better to a leader than building a community, it's the same difference, right? Is that establishing those relationships. So when you come together, you kind of feel like, "Oh, these are my people," right? It's good to see you. It's good to see everyone here.
Yes, Jen, you're spot on, and that resonates with me. I always tell people, my pastor once said that, you don't need folk until you need folk. And what we're not saying, Jen, is that you have to go to work and be besties with your colleagues. We're not even saying you have to go to work and be friends with your colleagues. But what we are saying is being in community and being friendly with each other. Because, Jen, you and I, we've both been in workplaces where things have been hard. It hasn't been a walk in the park every day. And those days when things are hard, we do turn to people at work, whether it's through a venting session, a water cooler conversation, walking to our cars in a parking lot. Those are all acts of building community. So if you do find your tribe, your people, in the workplace, that's great. But what we are saying is that there has to be some level of vulnerability, some level of that, and some level of, you know what, they got my back and I have their back. Whatever you choose to do after work, that's what you choose to do after work. I also want to say, I was just talking to a manager a few weeks ago about the onboarding process and why the onboarding process, Jen, is really important when you think about building community. So anytime we've started a new job, hopefully we've gone through some sort of onboarding process, and depending on your level within a company, that might be truncated so that you can deliver fast. I have my own thoughts about that. But be it as it may, I emphasize that the onboarding is really important, an important phase in building community at an organization, because you're trying to build social currency so that when you do need to collaborate with someone, that trust is already there and they know you. Like, Jen, if we're working at the same organization and you come to me and say, "DeMario, we need to collaborate on this project," I'm like, "Well, who are you?" But if we've already met and established this sense of community. And community is getting to know each other, understanding what our goals are and how we function within this ecosystem. When it is time to collaborate with each other, you and I, we're not operating off of ground zero. We have some modicum of interaction with one another.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. And so when you think about you've built a lot of communities throughout your life, you've been in communities, right? What do the most successful communities have in common?
I would say that they prioritize psychological safety. And I think the psychological safety is so important, or I know it to be very important, is because it allows people to opt into what parts of themselves they choose to showcase and be vulnerable. And when people feel valued, heard, and seen, they're willing to give a little bit more. And from my experience building communities, I've had members who, when they felt that they can come in and be themselves, both internally and external communities, when they can come in and be themselves, be a part of the decision making, they've taken co-ownership of that. And so it's taken the burden off of me to be able to drive this ship along, but I felt like I had this community of people who are also equally invested. Um, what I've also seen other successful communities do is amplify the voices of their members in it. It's really important, Jen, anytime that I've, been in-house building communities, I've always said that, I have this big microphone, I have this big stage. How do I use my privilege for good? How do I make sure? Because I'll tell you this, Jen, I know that I won't have that stage, forever, that microphone forever. But while I have it, how do I make sure that I'm amplifying as many voices as possible? I consider myself, a fighter for the underdog. I've been the underdog, and in many cases, I still am. But there are periods of my career where I've been in positions of privilege, and because I know that that's been precious, I said, DeMario, you have to use it for good. So I've seen successful communities really amplify the voices of its members. And then the third thing that I've seen communities do very well is to continue to iterate and evolve over time, because Jen, what probably initially brought us together might not be the thing that takes us into the future. So how do we be adaptable to be able to adjust to the needs of what the community wants and what the community needs as well?
So let me go back to the psychological safety, because that is, we talk about it all the time. It's like, it when it's there, but I think it is really hard for either leaders or community leaders, however you want to say that, how do they actually do it? You know what I mean? Like, what do you suggest for leaders who want to build that community? So it's same principles emerge, right? So whether you're a leader in your community as your team, or whether you're trying to create community elsewhere, how do you let people come in and just feel safe, especially if they're new to the group?
I would say is you have to invite people into the conversation. And for me, I've always been, Jen, anytime I've led a team or anytime that I've been a part of a community, I'm going to go back to that. It's a series of small actions. So anytime that I've led a team and I've wanted to build that psychological safety, I've always first modeled the behavior that I wanted to see. And so I've never asked anyone to demonstrate behavior that I myself wasn't willing to be vulnerable to display. And so, which is why, and I'm going to be a little loquacious with this, is when I think about like psychological safety and what that means for my team, and how do I do that? The first is anytime I talk about myself or introduce myself, I always showcase the most vulnerable parts of me, Jen, which is my first generation college graduate, formerly low income. I'm an introvert. There's relatability there. So people are like, okay, they're getting to know me. And so that kind of like breaks down any barriers that are there. The other piece, which I don't want to understate, Jen, is the power of one-on-one meetings. One-on-one meetings really allow a manager and an individual contributor to really get to know each other. It's very important that those one-on-ones are structured in a way where you're allowing time for the relational part and doing the transactional work. In team settings, be very cognizant, Jen, of who's speaking and who's not speaking. So and like being a monitor of airtime, I used to tell myself, and I just said this to a friend when I was building community in-house, you moderate and don't dominate. So you make sure, I always consider myself the conductor of the music. I wasn't actually playing it, but I was making sure that we were all on the same tune. So when you're in team meetings and you might see Margaret hadn't spoken, the entire hour. It's asking Margaret or anyone so that you're not calling anyone out, before we wrap up, is there anything that anyone has not said but want to say? Or if you want to directly call someone out and say, Margaret, I've worked with you before. You do great work. Any input that you have on this idea. So it's also sometimes you have to nudge people a little bit to even find their voice, because even when you have psychological safety, there are some people, Jen, who might struggle to find their voice. And I tell people, in order to find your voice, you have to use your voice, and the manager can be there to help a teammate come out in that way. So, I would say for a middle manager, and it's gonna look differently for each team, because each community is differently, each dynamic is differently. But I would say, model the behavior first so that your team knows what type of community you're trying to build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And those one-on-ones are important. Hopefully they happen. But even though I've seen some leaders that are very, they're not comfortable sharing, right? They can't let down their guard. Yeah. So I think it's even just a reflection point for managers to be like, how much am I sharing? How much am I even asking about that? Or am I just down to business? Because you're not going to build community just on the business alone and only talking business. It just doesn't happen.
And you raise a good point, Jen. There are people who, when they think about being vulnerable, they think about you have to share the most intimate parts of yourself. I'm not asking you to share anything you're not willing to share, but Jen, it can simply be, how was your weekend? How are things going on in your world? You can, like, the edge of my vulnerability looks differently than yours. And so we never want someone to do anything that they're not comfortable with. But I will say to managers is that stretch yourself a little bit, like get out of this archaic way of thinking that home and work are separate, because Jen, they're no longer separate. It's not like, Jen, when things are going awry at home, when you walk into your office or when you hop on Zoom, it all goes away. That's on your mind still. And you're trying to figure out, like, how do I contain that for this next 30 minutes or an hour? And then I'll pick that back up if I so choose. And so I say for middle managers, like, we have to stretch ourselves a little bit, so that we're not perpetuating this cycle of just like these two are separate, and contained. But again, you have to find that middle ground. It's a balance.
Yeah. And I'm always I encourage leaders just to be super honest. Like, hey, I struggle with the personal piece. Sure. This is hard for me. I am trying, and it may look awkward at first, but just know I'm trying, because it does look awkward. It looks like they're going through a checklist, and that's okay, because once you say, hey, because who's going to fault you for trying something, right? To try to connect. So just be honest. And as you said, everyone's level of vulnerability is different. And this was interesting to me. Someone pointed this out to me, because I remember going to this, I was in this retreat, and people were sharing, and then it got really deep and everyone's crying. And I was like, oh, I didn't sign up for all this, right? That was my level. I was like, no. And then someone pointed out to me, they're like, that probably wasn't even vulnerable for them. That's just their norm. So what to me looked like vulnerability is like, no, they just cry. Like they share these things with people, right? So it is.
Yes, that's a good example. No, I appreciate that. That is a really, really good example.
So everyone is different in their vulnerability. And like you said, you do not have to expose these deep, dark secrets. It is simply, how was your weekend? Learning something about their life, right?
Yeah. And, I'll say this, Jane, and you talked about the icebreakers. A couple of companies ago, I worked in customer success, and we had, the customer success team, we had a bi-weekly meeting. So everyone who worked in customer success, which I loved because it got me an opportunity to see all my colleagues, at least most of us, at the same time because we were really, really busy. And I don't like to glamorize being busy, but let me tell you, we were really busy.
Mm-hmm.
My manager who led the customer success department, we would open every meeting with what's bringing you joy or what's brought you joy lately. And one of the things I loved about that, Jen, is that it really allowed all of us to have a moment of introspection and a reflection about the past week or the past couple of weeks, and to hear, to hear my former colleagues or my colleagues at the time, just, talk about what joy looks like for them. And it was a very special 10 minutes of the agenda. And it also allowed us to ease into the work as well, because now we can hear differently. So now we're like, oh, we all felt good. We felt this sense of belonging. And although that had been cultivated outside of just that one meeting prompt, but it's something to be said. Those bite-sized moments of just like, how are you? And then you can move into the work, because the work is going to always be there. Knowing that we know the work will always be there, how do we still build in those culture building and those community building moments?
Yes, I'm a big fan of getting leaders to do just 5 minutes of connection. That's all you need. Just 5 minutes. You go right into the work. And yes, it really helps. And it brings that dopamine hit. It gets you thinking in a positive direction. So, DeMario, we talked about all the good things to do, but there's also some no-nos, right? There's some do not do this when you're trying to build community. What would you put on that list?
I would say the first is forcing participation. And so when we think about building community, it truly has to be from this intrinsic, authentic place. And I believe that communities thrive when the engagement is organic. And I'll give you an example. I'm wanting to introduce a rewards and recognition program to one of the communities that I was running. And before I implemented, I wanted to get feedback from my members around, if we introduce this, like what would be our guiding principles and like what should this look like? And consistently I heard, Jen, is that they did not want anything that would force them to chase this outcome, which is to be more engaged. They love the idea of being organically engaged, but want to be recognized for their contributions. And that really helped me think about gamification, rewards, and recognition, because it really should be from this intrinsic place of like, how do we reward the behaviors that we want to see? And so that goes to community. When people see that the behaviors that are rewarded are the ones that we want to see, then people will want to model that, because then we're not rewarding the behaviors that we don't want to see. So I would say that it has to be authentic. The second, and you and I, we talked about this, is that please, folks, please, you do not focus only on surface level activities, which are pizza parties, happy hours, they don't build meaningful connection at all. And in fact, some people are uncomfortable by that. So when you think about building community, as you and I, we've talked about, Jen, it has to be those consistent moments, those micro moments throughout just work. The other piece I would say, and not to give you a laundry list, but the other piece we talked about this is negating psychological safety. Like when people fear judgment or negative consequences of being themselves, like you truly can't build genuine community, because now people fear there's a risk for them really showing up and being who they are. And then the last piece I would say, going back to reliability, is there cannot be this misalignment between your words and your actions. So if you say you're going to do something, then you have to deliver on it, because the thing is, Jen, if I tell you I'm going to do something and I don't deliver, not only do I lose reliability with you, I also lose credibility as well. And we see that in the workplace when organizations say that they're going to do something, when managers say they're going to do something, and then it's one thing not to do it, but also communicate that you just didn't do it at all. If you come back and say, Jen, originally, DeMario, I said that we would be able to do this, there's been a change, this might not happen. You've been transparent and you brought me into the process. You've closed that loop with me. But if you act like we never had that discussion, In the absence of information, we begin to create narratives for ourselves. So I would say those are some no-nos when building community. You know, you have to prioritize psychological safety. Do what you say you're going to do, and don't force the engagement. Let it happen organically.
Yes. And one of the things you said is something that I have just been like, I've been talking to every leader about, like, reward the behaviors you want to see and keep people accountable if they're bringing down the community of the team, the camaraderie of the team. And oftentimes they just don't do that. And they're saying, if you keep recognizing people for innovation or creativity or being a good collaborator, more will follow. So I like that you mentioned that. All right, DeMario, if you had to give a middle manager something they could do tomorrow to start building community within their team, what would that be?
You know, I have to say this, and it's going to be a plug, Jen, but I want to be honest. I really love it. It's one of my favorite activities. So I love Co-Champ's Belonging Badges activity, and you're familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I love the Belonging Badges activity, and in fact, I just did this at a workshop, is that it allows, it's a fun activity, number one, but it really allows people to learn more about themselves, actually. So while you are sharing, you know, and with the Belonging Badges activity, it's, you know, labels that we use to describe ourselves beyond the work that we do. So instead of introducing myself and say, you know, Jen, I'm a founder of a company. Jen, I'm a first generation college graduate. I'm an introvert. I'm a middle child. So what are those parts of my identity that make up who I am, which is what Belonging Badges are? What I like about that activity is that it really allows for you to get to know more about yourself, but also for your team to know as well. Because if I say in that activity, Jen, that I'm an introvert, then to you as a middle manager, you can pick up on that and say, so I know now in team settings, you know, DeMario might be less likely to speak first or less likely to raise their hand. And so that's just a note. So I might contribute through Slack or through a comment. And so that activity really allows a middle manager and also your colleagues just to learn those little nuances about you. So I would say if that's one thing, you know, find Co-Champ, pick up the Belonging Badges activity. I would also say, you know, if that's not accessible right now, I would say start small. To be honest with you, Jen, start small. It doesn't have to be big. Just start with a simple "how are you?" and let it go from there. You know, I think that community, it has a snowball effect, you know, and it doesn't have to be this big, you know, act. Don't wait until an offsite. You know, don't wait until a workshop, because I tell people offsites and workshops typically they don't have lasting impact because they're one-offs. And so it takes a series of repeated actions for things to percolate, you know, with us and to have impact. So start small.
Yes, a series of repeated actions. Amen on that one. And I think we have that culture first, that the Belonging Badges on an activity I can link up in the show notes.
Yes.
So I should be able to do that for people. All right. Well, DeMario, where can people find out more about you and potentially connect?
Thank you, Jen. So I am always on LinkedIn, almost always. So just search me, DeMario Bell on LinkedIn. Also, I have my own consultancy as well. So I help companies think about community and what that looks like on the customer side and also on the employee side. I love talking about community. So if you are curious about community or you jam out about community, let's just have a conversation. You can find me at gatherfulconsulting.com and we can find some time to chat. So either on LinkedIn or go to gatherfulconsulting.com.
And I'll link both of those up in the show notes. But DeMario, before we end, is there any additional thoughts you have, any statements you want to make before we close out?
I would say, Jen, you know, we talked about this before we started, is that we need community more now than ever. And we need those spaces where we can just be and have those moments where we can just feel safe. And so I tell anyone out there, you know, find your people. Truly find your people, because we need community more now than ever.
Yeah, we know it makes all the difference. DeMario, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen.